Eleanor Vaughn was the perfect wife. Wealthy, poised, and admired by Houston's elite, she had spent years playing the role of devoted spouse to one of Texas's most powerful businessmen. But beneath the designer dresses and carefully rehearsed smiles, she was suffocating in a loveless marriage. Tristan Reyes was a man who knew how to take what he wanted. Young, ambitious, and dangerously charming, he had spent his life clawing his way up from nothing. When he met Eleanor, he saw more than just an affair. He saw an opportunity. Together, they ignited a scandalous passion that would lead to a chilling betrayal, a murder that looked like the perfect crime, and a shocking twist that no one saw coming. Eleanor Vaughn seemed to have it all. At 45, she was the envy of Houston's high society, glamorous, poised, and married to one of the wealthiest oil tycoons in Texas, Louis Vaughn. Their estate, a sprawling mansion surrounded by acres of perfectly manicured gardens, was a symbol of their success. Eleanor spent her days attending exclusive charity events, dining at the finest restaurants, and shopping at designer boutiques. To outsiders, her life was a dream, but behind the luxurious facade, Eleanor was drowning in dissatisfaction. Her marriage to Louis, once passionate and full of promise, had become cold and transactional. Louis, 20 years her senior, had been charming and attentive in the early years, lavishing her with gifts and affection. But as his business empire grew, so did his emotional distance. Conversations between them had become mechanical, revolving around business events and social appearances rather than love or intimacy. He was constantly away on business trips, and when he was home, he spent more time in his private study than with his wife. Eleanor had tried to fill the void with distractions, lavish parties, European vacations, expensive hobbies, but nothing satisfied her for long. Her beauty, once her greatest weapon, was now a constant source of anxiety. She obsessed over every wrinkle, every sign of aging, fearing that she was losing the allure that once captivated men. In a world where youth and beauty were currency, she felt like she was running out of both. The loneliness weighed heavily on her, but she was too proud to admit it. She smiled for the cameras, played the role of the devoted wife, and carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had everything. But deep inside, she longed for something more: passion, excitement, the thrill of feeling truly desired again. She wanted to feel alive. One evening, after another dull society gathering, Eleanor found herself at an upscale lounge in downtown Houston. She had gone there alone, craving a moment of escape before returning to her empty mansion. The dim lighting, soft jazz, and clinking of crystal glasses created an atmosphere that made her feel young again. That's when she noticed him. Tristan Reyes was behind the bar, mixing cocktails with a confident ease. At 28, he was strikingly handsome, with dark eyes that held an intensity that immediately drew Eleanor in. There was something effortless about him, his charm, his smile, the way he moved. He wasn't polished like the men in her circle. He was raw, unrefined, and completely intoxicating. When he noticed Eleanor watching him, he gave her a slow, knowing smile. It had been years since a man looked at her like that. Not with polite admiration, but with genuine desire. She ordered a drink, and he lingered as he served it, their hands brushing slightly. It was the smallest touch, but it sent a thrill through her. The night stretched on, and with every sip of her martini, Eleanor let herself sink deeper into the feeling. Tristan made her laugh, something she hadn't done in a long time. He listened to her, made her feel interesting, desirable. It didn't take long before the air between them crackled with unspoken temptation. When she finally left the bar, she felt something she hadn't in years: excitement. The thought of Tristan stayed with her, playing over and over in her mind. She told herself it was harmless, just a brief moment of fun. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had crossed a line that night, even if nothing had happened yet. As she drove back to her mansion, her heart pounded with an unfamiliar exhilaration. She had no idea that the decision to walk into that bar would set off a chain of events that would lead to betrayal, murder, and her ultimate downfall. Tristan Reyes had always known how to charm people. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, he had learned early that good looks and a silver tongue could open doors that money couldn't. He had never been one to settle for less, always, looking for an opportunity to climb higher, to get closer to the life he believed he deserved. Working as a bartender at one of Houston's most exclusive lounges put him in the orbit of wealthy socialites, powerful businessmen, and women who were desperate for attention. He had been with older women before, women who saw him as a temporary escape, someone to make them feel young again. But Eleanor Vaughn was different. She wasn't just another bored housewife. She was the wife of one of the richest men in Texas, a woman with access to unlimited wealth. And from the moment she sat at his bar, he knew she was craving something more than just a drink. Eleanor became a regular at the lounge, always arriving alone, always dressed to perfection. Each visit she lingered a little longer, stayed a little later. Their conversations grew more intimate, moving beyond casual flirtation into something deeper. She told him about her life, her loneliness, the way her husband barely noticed her anymore. Tristan listened with the patience of someone who understood exactly what she needed to hear. He flattered her, made her feel irresistible, reminded her that she was still desirable. It wasn't long before their connection spilled beyond the bar. One night, Eleanor invited him to a private hotel suite where their chemistry ignited into something dangerous. She was intoxicated by him, the way he touched her, the way he looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. For the first time in years, she felt alive, reckless, and completely free. Their affair became a carefully crafted secret. She found excuses to leave the mansion, created elaborate lies about charity events and weekend getaways. They met in hidden corners of the city, slipping into luxurious hotels and secluded resorts. Eleanor showered Tristan with expensive gifts, designer suits, a Rolex, even the keys to a brand-new luxury car. He accepted them all without hesitation, knowing they were nothing compared to what he truly wanted. For Tristan, this was more than just an affair. It was an opportunity. He had spent years serving drinks to men who had everything he had ever dreamed of: money, power, influence. Now, for the first time, he was close to it, touching the edges of a world he had always envied. But there was one problem. As long as Louis Vaughn was in the picture, Eleanor would never truly be his. At first, he hinted at it subtly. He planted ideas in Eleanor's mind, painting a picture of a future where they could be together without secrets. Wouldn't it be incredible to wake up beside each other every morning? To travel the world together without hiding? He made her fantasize about a life where she was free from the cold, loveless marriage that had trapped her for so long. Eleanor resisted the idea at first. The thought of doing anything drastic terrified her, but as the weeks went by, the idea began to take root. She had spent years feeling like a prisoner in her own home, a decorative trophy wife with no real happiness. Now, for the first time, she saw a way out. A way to have everything: her freedom, her wealth, and the man who made her feel alive. She told herself it wasn't real, that it was just a fantasy. But late at night, as she lay beside her husband in their cold, oversized bed, she couldn't stop thinking about it. What if Louis was gone? What if she didn't have to pretend anymore? What if she could finally have the life she truly wanted? And just like that, the perfect affair began to twist into something far more dangerous. Eleanor Vaughn had never considered herself capable of murder. The idea had once seemed unthinkable, something that belonged in crime novels and whispered scandals, not in her perfectly curated life. But now, as she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Louis snored beside her, the thought consumed her. It wasn't just about passion anymore. It was about freedom. Every day spent playing the devoted wife, trapped in a marriage that suffocated her, felt unbearable. And Tristan had given her the answer. Lewis's death would solve everything. The plan took shape slowly. Eleanor wasn't impulsive. She knew that if she were to go through with this, it had to be flawless. A crime of passion was too risky. A staged accident would be cleaner, less suspicious. Lewis had a habit of taking weekend hunting trips to their secluded ranch in West Texas. The property stretched for miles, nothing but rolling fields, thick woods, and the occasional deer wandering too close to the house. It was the perfect place for something to go wrong. She started planting the idea subtly, suggesting that they spend a weekend there together, just the two of them. Lewis was surprised. She had never shown much interest in the ranch before, but he didn't question it. He assumed she wanted to rekindle whatever was left of their marriage, and perhaps, on some level, that was what she wanted him to believe, too. Tristan was waiting for her outside a coffee shop the night she told him everything was in place. His face remained unreadable as she laid out the details. They would arrive at the ranch Friday evening. The next night, after Lewis had a few drinks, Tristan would be waiting in the darkness. A gunshot, a quick disposal of the evidence, and it would all be over. Eleanor would call the police, frantic and distraught, claiming that an intruder had killed her husband. Given the remote location, no one would question why the killer had vanished into the night. As the weekend approached, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of nerves and exhilaration. She had spent years feeling powerless, but now she was the one in control. She was orchestrating her own future, shaping it exactly as she wanted. She packed carefully for the trip, making sure to include Lewis's favorite bottle of whiskey. It would help dull his senses, make him less aware of what was coming. The drive to the ranch was quiet, the tension between them thick. Lewis, unaware of what was about to unfold, seemed almost relaxed. He poured himself a drink the moment they arrived, settling onto the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. Eleanor joined him, forcing herself to play the role of the affectionate wife. She laughed at his stories, touched his arm lightly, and poured him another drink when his glass ran empty. Night fell, and the air grew still. Eleanor excused herself inside, her hands shaking slightly as she sent the text. Tristan was waiting just beyond the tree line, dressed in dark clothing, the weight of the gun heavy in his hands. He moved carefully, silently, his pulse steady. As he approached the house, Lewis never saw him coming. The shot echoed across the open land, a single, precise hit to the chest. Eleanor heard the sound from inside and let out a scream, running onto the porch with wide, tear-filled eyes. She knelt beside Lewis's body, pressing her hands against his still warm skin, smearing blood on her fingers. When she picked up the phone to call 911, her voice was raw with fear, with grief. She was the perfect widow, the perfect victim. When the police arrived, everything went according to plan. The house showed no signs of forced entry. Nothing was missing. A tragic robbery gone wrong. That's what they believed. Eleanor clutched a blanket around her shoulders as officers questioned her, her hands trembling, her breath unsteady. No one doubted her. As she sat in the back of the ambulance, staring out at the flashing lights, she let herself exhale. It was done. Lewis was gone. But what she didn't realize, what neither of them realized, was that they had already made their first mistake, and it would only be a matter of time before everything unraveled. Eleanor Vaughn had spent years perfecting the image of grace and control. She knew how to command attention at society events, how to give the perfect measured response to reporters, how to ensure that nothing ever seemed out of place. Now, as she stood in front of a sea of mourners at Lewis's funeral, dressed in an elegant black dress with a delicate veil over her eyes, she played her role flawlessly. Tears streamed down her face at just the right moments. Her voice trembled as she thanked guests for their condolences. She leaned on close friends for support, her posture fragile but dignified. Everyone who attended whispered the same thing. What a tragic loss. What a devoted wife. How terribly unfair life could be. No one suspected a thing. In the days that followed, Eleanor felt the weight of her newfound freedom. The Vaughn estate now belonged to her. The businesses, the accounts, the wealth, everything Lewis had built was now in her hands. For the first time in decades, she was no longer just Lewis Vaughn's wife. She was the widow of a powerful man, a woman with her own influence. Tristan, on the other hand, had no interest in patience. While Eleanor carefully played her part, he was already thinking about what came next. He had risked everything for her, for them, and now he wanted his reward. But Eleanor had started to see things differently. The thrill of their affair, the passion, the danger. It had been intoxicating when Lewis was still alive. But now, Tristan was a liability. She began pulling away slowly, deliberately. She stopped answering his calls immediately. She made excuses when he wanted to see her. At first, he brushed it off as grief, believing that once enough time had passed, they would finally be together the way they had planned. But as weeks went by, doubt crept in. Eleanor was still going to charity events, still hosting dinners, still playing the part of a high society widow, but he was nowhere in the picture. Tristan felt himself losing control. He had always been the one who could read people, who knew how to get what he wanted. But Eleanor was slipping through his fingers. The gifts, the promises, the dreams they had whispered about in dimly lit hotel rooms. Had any of it ever meant anything to her? Had she only used him? As his frustration grew, so did the police's interest in the case. At first, they had taken Eleanor's story at face value. A robbery gone wrong was tragic, but not uncommon. However, something about the scene at the ranch nagged at the detectives assigned to the case. There had been no signs of forced entry. No valuables had been taken. The entire situation felt too precise, too clean. They started digging. They examined Eleanor's financial records and found unusual transactions, large sums of cash withdrawn in the weeks leading up to Lewis's death. Hotel reservations that placed her in the same places as a man named Tristan Reyes, a bartender who, until recently, had been struggling to pay rent and now suddenly owned a luxury car. Tristan could feel the walls closing in. One night, unable to contain his anger any longer, he confronted Eleanor. He accused her of trying to erase him, of taking everything for herself while leaving him with nothing. But Eleanor, always composed, warned him to be careful. He was the disposable one, not her. If the police ever came asking questions, who did he think they would believe? The grieving widow or the bartender with a sudden windfall of unexplained wealth? Tristan left that night knowing one thing for certain. Eleanor would do anything to protect herself, and if he didn't act fast, she would make sure that he took the fall for everything. Tristan Reyes had spent his whole life finding ways to survive. He had charmed, manipulated, and maneuvered his way into places he didn't belong, but now he was backed into a corner. The woman he had risked everything for was slipping away, and worse, he could feel the weight of suspicion turning in his direction. The police were asking questions, and Eleanor Vaughn, the woman who once clung to him, who had whispered promises of a life together, was now looking at him like he was nothing more than a loose end that needed to be tied up. Panic crept into his every thought. He had believed he was in control, but Eleanor had played the game better. She had wealth, status, and power, while he had nothing but a trail of evidence that pointed directly at him. Every purchase she had made for him, the car, the watches, the expensive trips, now looked like payoffs. His bank account, once empty, was suddenly filled with unexplained deposits. He could see what was happening. She was making sure that, when the truth came out, he would be the only one left standing in the wreckage. Detectives started following him, watching his movements. They knew something wasn't right. and the pressure was suffocating. He knew Eleanor was playing it differently, still mourning, still donating to charities in Lewis's name, still putting on the performance of a lifetime. No one questioned her, but they questioned him. One night, Tristan made a decision. If Eleanor was going to throw him to the wolves, he wasn't going down alone. He scheduled a meeting with the lead detective, walking into the police station with an air of desperation. He told them everything, how Eleanor had planned the entire thing, how she had convinced him to be the one to pull the trigger, how she had made sure he was too entangled to escape. But there was one problem. He had no real proof. Eleanor had never put anything in writing, never left a trail. It was his word against hers, and Tristan knew how that would end. The detectives listened carefully, taking notes, weighing his story against the evidence they had gathered. While Eleanor had been careful, she hadn't been flawless. There were inconsistencies in her alibi. Surveillance footage from hotels placed her with Tristan more often than she admitted. Phone records showed late-night calls between them in the weeks leading up to Lewis's murder. The perfect widow was starting to look less perfect. Eleanor, of course, denied everything. When confronted by detectives, she played the role of the betrayed woman beautifully. She painted Tristan as an obsessive lover, a man who had misinterpreted her kindness as something more. She had tried to help him, she said, had given him money when he needed it, but he had turned into a jealous, unstable man who wanted more than she could give. She claimed she had no idea he was capable of something so monstrous. It was a battle of manipulation, two liars fighting to convince the world of their own twisted versions of the truth. But in the end, money and power won. Eleanor walked free, her army of lawyers making sure there was never enough evidence to charge her. Tristan, however, was not so lucky. With his fingerprints on the gun, the financial transactions in his name, and Eleanor's testimony painting him as a bitter, vengeful man, he was found guilty of Eleanor Vaughn's murder and sentenced to life in prison. Eleanor emerged from the scandal untouchable. The whispers never fully went away. But in high society, money had a way of making people forget. She sold the ranch where Lewis died, bought a penthouse in New York, and slowly let the past fade into a tragic story she rarely spoke of. But in the silence of her new life, there were moments when she wondered if she had truly won. She had gotten everything she wanted, had outsmarted everyone. Yet late at night, in the quiet of her luxury apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, someone was still watching,